Ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe to this channel right now. The most important story in American politics today, in addition to the fact that Trump will very likely win in a landslide, you have every poll showing Trump up, even in states like Michigan and Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. He's closer in Minnesota. He's doing very, very well. Nothing is going to stop him from regaining the Oval Office and dissolving the special counsel. Thank God. It's purely partisan, and it's what despots and authoritarians do, going after their direct political opponents while at the same time covering up their corruption. But hit subscribe to this channel. In a couple of seconds, you will hear the Honorable Justice John Roberts, Paul Bartlett, to my viewers in Australia and around the world. Paul, thank you so much. And to my super chat, thank you. If you want to support my work long term, everybody, my Patreon is below. But Paul, I cannot thank you enough. You've been so generous, and you're absolutely so wonderful. Every single live stream, you're so generous. Thank you, Paul. In Australia, to my viewers in the Philippines, in New Zealand, Australia, UK, Canada, Sweden, Nigeria, everywhere around the world, Korea, God bless you. Thank you so much. Let's get started. I want to just give you, we'll first start off with John Roberts against the Colorado lawyer right before a 9-0 Supreme Court decision that I told you about would happen, I said the Supreme Court of the United States of America, the court that interprets the Constitution, the highest court in the land, will side with Trump in a unanimous 9-0 Supreme Court ruling, defending Trump and opposing Democrats. How embarrassing must it be for a liberal Democrat to have the Supreme Court, even the liberal justices, completely dismantle a truly unconstitutional and despotic argument stating that Trump should be banned? Okay, they know he's going to win. They're trying desperately in the most miserable manner to get him off the ballot, to hurt him politically, to bankrupt him. None of these things are working. One of the reasons is that the Supreme Court will continually back Trump. I'll explain why they just gave, including John Roberts, just gave him a huge victory with presidential immunity. Hit subscribe right now. We're almost at 223,000 subscribers. We're on our way to 300,000 before November. Every single day this year, and you'll hear Justice Roberts in a second, and Paul Bartlett, thank you again. Every single day this year will be a countdown to November when Trump regains the Oval Office. And every wonderful, highly educated, morally superior liberal Democrat and person to the left of center in this country and around the world realizes that the American people wanted Trump not only in 2016, but in 2024 because he was a great president, record low poverty, record highs in household median income, inflation low, interest rates low. Interest rates, someone should tell, the Hollywood millionaires, Bill Maher, one of them, who's a very intelligent person but doesn't realize that the economy is not good. We're on the brink of a stock market crash of epic proportions. And that's because interest rates to buy a home are 7 to 8%. When they say inflation is low, they don't tell you that interest rates are through the roof. And inflation is still high for food and rent. But hit subscribe to this channel right now. Let's listen to John Roberts. This is a precursor to the immunity issue. I'll get to exactly why Roberts and Clarence and Justice Thomas and Kavanaugh and Barrett and Alito and Gorsuch have given Trump a huge victory already. Let's listen to Roberts dismantle the Colorado argument against Trump. That'll correlate directly to the immunity win for Trump.
A congressional action to permit Confederate officers or people who supported the Confederacy to hold office before the 14th Amendment, correct? So there must have been a thought that there was a pre-existing disqualification.
That's absolutely right. There were a flood of amnesty requests even before Section 3 went into effect because everybody understood at the time that those people would be disqualified the moment that Section 3 was enacted forever unless they received amnesty.
Counselor, what do you do with what would seem to me to be plain consequences of your position? If Colorado's position is upheld, surely there will be disqualification proceedings on the other side, and some of those will succeed. Some of them will have different standards of proof. Some of them will have different rules about evidence. Maybe the Senate report won't be accepted in others because it's hearsay. Maybe it's beyond a reasonable doubt, whatever. In very quick order, I would expect, although my predictions have never been correct, I would expect that a goodly number of states will say whoever the Democratic candidate is, you're off the ballot, and others for the Republican candidate, you're off the ballot. And it'll come down to just a handful of states that are going to decide the presidential election. That's a pretty daunting consequence.
Well, certainly, Your Honor, the fact that there are potential frivolous applications of a constitutional provision isn't a reason.
Well, no, hold on. I mean, you might think they're frivolous, but probably the people who are bringing them may not think they're frivolous. Insurrection is a broad term, and if there's some debate about it, I suppose that will go into the decision, and then eventually what we would be deciding whether there was an insurrection when one president did something as opposed to when somebody else did something else. And what do? Do we wait until near the time of counting the ballots and sort of go through which states are valid and which states aren't?
There's a reason Section 3 has been dormant for 150 years, and it's because we haven't seen anything like January 6th. Since Reconstruction. Insurrection.
That's what Democrats do, by the way, all the time. And Costa Bob, hello, that at its highest levels is going to be a huge consolidation market if rates come down. Costa Bob, thank you. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate your support. Yes, what Democrats do, thank you again. What Democrats do is they say, well, we've never seen Trump, so that justifies our completely irrational behavior towards him. It's like, no, it's the other way around. What Democrats have done to Trump is not normal. It is completely irrational. It's apoplectic. It is it's trampling upon norms and traditions, and they justify their complete insanity by saying, well, we've never seen Trump. It's like, no. Democrats have never had the influence over virtually all of American media, Hollywood. Now we have algorithms. They've never had this political power and influence before. They've not only misused it, they've actually managed to make Trump stronger. How miserably failed do you have to be? If you're a wonderful, highly educated, morally superior liberal Democrat who has devoted his or her entire life in media, in politics, to taking down and opposing Trump, only to make him more powerful and influential. I mean, that's sad. You have the Democratic Party that has thrown everything, including the kitchen sink, at Trump, and he's like the Obi-Wan Kenobi of politics. It's not just Teflon Don. It's like he's actually more influential, more popular, the more that Democrats try to disparage and demean. Nobody trusts. They said, oh, he said it's going to be a bath of sorts. That's nonsense. He was talking about the automotive industry. Then you have one Scarborough on MSNBC saying, oh, we knew what he meant. It's like now they're just blatantly lying. So now not only do they realize that everyone knows they're taking Trump's words out of context, but they actually are now doubling down and saying, oh, well, yes, we're taking his words out of context because that's what he truly meant. They're not even lying anymore. They're actually admitting their motive, their intent to deceive. Hit subscribe if you're new.
Against the Constitution is something extraordinary.
It seems to me you're avoiding the question, which is other states may have different views about what constitutes insurrection. And now you're saying, well, it's all right because somebody, presumably us, are going to decide, well, they said they thought that was an insurrection, but they were wrong. And maybe they thought it was right. And we'd have to develop rules for what constitutes an insurrection.
Yes, Your Honor, just like this Court interprets other constitutional provisions, this Court can make clear that an insurrection against the Constitution is something extraordinary. And in particular, it really requires a concerted group effort to resist through violence, not some ordinary application of state or federal law, but the functions mandated by the Constitution.
On your point that it's been
There.
So you heard Justice Roberts there completely dismantle the entire argument, okay? A rebellion against the Constitution is a very broad statement. The indictment uses statutes that say that Trump defrauded the Constitution, the Congress, the American people. He did nothing of the sort. He had every right to try and contest results by working with administration officials and by performing a speech and by utilizing his influence as president. Now, if Democrats feel that's blasphemous, who cares? That's irrelevant. It's not unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court is now looking, and you have to understand why I'm doing these segments. They have already given him a monumental victory, people. This is what everyone should be talking about. It's not just, ladies and gentlemen, it's not just that the Supreme Court is going to look at the presidential immunity case. It's not just that. Anon, thank you so much. It's not just that, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? The issue is that even if they give him partial or a little bit of presidential immunity, let's just say they say part of the speech or the speech itself, because he's being indicted for a speech he gave to what they call constituents, which is just a speech to the American people. Okay? They're saying that what he did that day in January fell outside of the protections afforded by the Constitution. But the problem is that, do you then indict other presidents for a speech? That's why I'm doing these segments, ladies and gentlemen, because it's not just Trump. Do you then indict other presidents in the future or in the past for a speech? Was there a speech that President Obama gave right before intervening in Libya that completely decimated that country? Our intervention was a very bad thing in that country. Could then President Obama be indicted and imprisoned because of a speech that had falsehoods within it? Okay? You can't imprison a president, former or current president, for doing what he thought was best based on his political viewpoint at the time. Okay, if a president is engaged in an actual burglary like Watergate, well, a burglary is not covered under the Constitution. A speech is. President-elect, God bless H.A. Goodman, God bless Donald Trump, God bless you, President-elect, thank you. And God bless everybody watching. Thank you so much, President-elect. That's the point, ladies and gentlemen. President-elect, thank you. Here's John Roberts on the Constitution.
Issue we confront all the time, but I think we get more and more of those cases as technology changes. For example, Fourth Amendment says searches and seizures have to be reasonable. The issue came up when we first had telephones, and the people were able to tap into telephones and hear. Well, is that a search or seizure under the Fourth Amendment? Well, the founding fathers, not even Jefferson, thought about telephones. So how can how do you say what they meant to how the Fourth Amendment should apply to something they never thought of? And the answer is partly in what we were just talking about. You go back to the precedents and see how they applied the Constitution to new developments. I'm not sure I got my history straight here yet, but I don't think there were railroads when they wrote the Constitution, or they were just coming in, or there certainly weren't automobiles, all right? But automobiles, does that constitute interstate commerce or not? And you see cases saying, well, sure, it's just simply another way of traveling, and they were familiar with that, and they applied the principles of the Commerce Clause to travel, so why should it make a difference how quickly you get to travel or by what means? The same thing with the airplane. You say, well, the Founding Fathers never thought of the airplane. Well, it's not terribly different other than in terms of efficiency from means of travel with which they were familiar. And what were they trying to do in the Fourth Amendment, in terms of protecting people's privacy and requiring judges to issue search warrants before you intrude upon their privacy? Well, isn't tapping into the phones, isn't that an intrusion on their privacy to the same extent as sort of like listening in on a private conversation in the house? And wouldn't they have wanted the same principles to apply? So, it's not easy when you take something that wasn't familiar to them. It's easier when it is something and you can apply it directly. But things like the internet, I mean, how does the First Amendment apply to the internet? And you try to think, well, is that just like the newspapers with which they were familiar, or is it somehow different? And the lawyers will argue that. The lawyer on one side will say this is just like a pamphlet, when you put a blog out. It's just like people circulating pamphlets, and they knew a lot more. They had a lot of pamphlets back at the time of the founding. But the lawyer on the other side is going to say, no, this is a lot different. It's more like, say, a radio or television, and we have a greater tradition of regulating radio and television than we do regulating pamphlets. So you ought to apply different laws. And they'll go back, just as I was saying earlier, to those precedents and try to find the ones that they think fit most closely.
Is there a precedent, ladies and gentlemen, and President-elect, thank you again. Is there a precedent for imprisoning a president? Say that 10 times. Is there a precedent for imprisoning a president over a speech? He said go home peacefully, number one. Number two, the Supreme Court is not the reason that Jack Smith is going to lose, the special counsel is going to lose. The reason that all of these indictments are going to lose, that aren't going to lead to even 1 second of Trump being in prison or jail, is that when you make a leap of logic, okay, you make a leap of logic. You say that Trump should be imprisoned. So this is why there was a 9-0 Supreme Court decision. Okay? Read the indictment. I'm not going to go over it. I mean, I guess you could here. I mean, we could go over it. I'm not going to bore you with it. Read the indictment in D.C. Okay? Read the indictment in D.C. It's written as if, all of these indictments are written as if an MSNBC writer or producer or director wrote them. Okay? Tony, thank you. The problem with the D.C. indictment, like all of these indictments, is that they're too broad and ambiguous, and they make absurd leaps of logic. Paul Bartlett, thank you again. Trump did not commit a crime. Okay, Nixon, for example, was part of a burglary. Watergate was a burglary. That day in January, Trump had literally nothing to do with the criminal behavior. Okay, just like apparently Chuck Schumer had nothing to do with a human being a person trying to take Kavanaugh's life. Justice Kavanaugh, after Schumer basically targeted him in a speech. Okay, they're not going after Chuck Schumer. They're not going after the Democrats the summer prior where there was billions in property damage, and I agree with why people peacefully demonstrated. But there were billions in property damage, okay? And you had 19 lives lost. And there was rhetoric that you could directly correlate. One congresswoman said, get in people's faces. But Democrats don't correlate the vitriol and venom within their political speech with billions in property damage. They say, well, Trump performed a speech, and after that speech, people lost their lives. Yeah, an unarmed woman had her life taken. And yet not a word from Democrats and activists on the left. Not a word. In fact, in the most sinister manner, they're almost gleeful, which is the most disgusting type of response to an unarmed human being. But again, these people live in basically what amounts to a cult. So they amplify emotion if it benefits them, and they try to mitigate emotion if it doesn't benefit them politically. And they make absurd, stupid, grandiose leaps of logic. Trump performed a speech, therefore he had everything to do with the criminal activity because he compelled people to commit crimes. Nothing he said led people to commit a crime. Literally nothing he said. That political speech that he used was used by Democrats and Republicans for centuries. But then again, I mean, you see they're taking his words out of context, completely out of context. Let's go ahead really quickly and listen to Greg Jarrett. This is really fantastic. He'll tell you exactly why Trump will get a huge victory, even partial immunity. If they say, if Trump gets partial immunity, it'll be publicized initially as Trump loses. And then they'll realize, but Trump really gained and he actually won. Trump gets partial immunity. That means that they have to go back down, all the way down to lower courts to find out what is official and unofficial presidential conduct. And they'll find out, yet again, that a speech is official presidential conduct, and that is protected by the Constitution. You can perform a speech, okay? A lot of Bush performed many speeches right before endless military conflict. His speeches were based on lies. He ain't getting indicted or imprisoned ever. Neither will Trump for a criminal behavior that had literally nothing to do with anything he said. But listen to this. This is really interesting.
And maybe even the better argument for the court. Your take.
Well, I think the Supreme Court looked at the circuit court decision and said, hey, you went way too far. You're dismissing any notion of immunity, even if a president acts consistent with his duties. That is absurd logically. And it's inconsistent, by the way, and this is the important part, with the Supreme Court precedent 4 decades ago that a president does have absolute immunity from civil lawsuits as long as his actions fall within the outer perimeter of his official acts. Well, Sean, the exact same reasoning applies to criminal prosecutions. If it's otherwise, my goodness, the chilling effect on presidential decision-making would trigger paralysis. Instead of a chief executive, so America would be ruled by a committee of lawyers. They'd be afraid to do anything out of fear of future prosecution.
Greg, let me ask you this. Would a more nuanced version versus the argument of absolute immunity maybe be, of course, you have freedom of speech, but you can't yell fire in a crowded building? Would that be, would there be an analogy there?
Yes.
And you would expect the court to do that.
And Jordan said this as well. I suspect the current justices will extend the existing immunity standard in civil actions to criminal cases and then remand the Trump case back to the trial court to decide whether Trump's acts are covered as official acts.
So Nixon versus Fitzgerald is a Supreme Court decision ruling landmark that said a president is covered from civil litigation, which also leads to a president being covered from criminal repercussions for official acts. Okay, think about President Obama. Think about his speech before intervening in Libya and all the chaos and mayhem that resulted from that failed intervention. Think about Bush and the endless military quagmires from his speeches based on lies, and where President Obama told lies also. And, Biden, for example, literally on tape telling on himself, bragging and boasting that he forced out a prosecutor and wouldn't give $1 billion in loan guarantees. And so you're not going to get Trump. The leap of logic that they're making is that Trump tried to interfere in a congressional ceremony. No, he didn't. He even told people that they should allow that day to take place. And just, he did not tell anyone to commit any crimes. They're saying his speech and his presence there interrupted a congressional proceeding, but it didn't. It didn't. Trump didn't interrupt anything. If people committed crimes, that has literally nothing to do with Trump. Of course, Democrats try to, oh my God, you see what happened? It's Trump's fault. Everything is Trump's fault, but it's not Schumer's fault. If somebody wants to take the life of a justice, it's not the fault of Democrats. If there's billions in property damage, they're literally bailing out demonstrators who then, some of whom, then commit even more egregious, heinous crimes. So, the immorality, the hypocrisy is unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. But this is a huge victory for Trump, and it's only like one of many victories. This is when the Supreme Court refused to expedite. This is before even they're going to hear the immunity case and give Trump a victory in immunity, which will happen, because they're not going to allow future presidents to be imprisoned for performing a speech. Okay, that you literally would not have a functioning government if every single president was in fear of criminal litigation from his political opponents. But you wouldn't have a functioning government or presidency or executive branch, which is exactly what the Supreme Court is trying to keep intact. See, Democrats are so apoplectic and, basically hysterical in their vitriol against Trump that they can't see straight. That's why they're like, oh, pack the court, because the Supreme Court is not influenced by the Democratic Party. Media, lower courts, Hollywood, algorithms, they have virtually a virtual monopoly on political thought in this country. Not in terms of how the average person feels, but in terms of the airwaves, let's say. The one branch of government, or the one institution they cannot influence, is the Supreme Court. And guess what? It's a conservative Supreme Court. So good luck trying to imprison Trump. This is a losing proposition from day one. Every single day is a huge victory for Trump or a celebration of an upcoming victory. People don't realize how important the immunity case is, and even if they give him a tiny partial victory on immunity, he could have they could get full immunity, and then there goes the DC case completely, which would be hilarious. The response from Democrats would be absolutely amusing. But even just saying, yeah, we don't like official acts, he's covered, so a speech is an official act. Let's take it to lower courts to find out what is an official act and unofficial act is. And then they'll realize that, yeah, official acts are him speaking to administration officials or him speaking to his constituents or whatever, the American people, via a speech. They're trying to also say that he had no right to speak to his officials because that wasn't in the interest of the American people. It's like, well, yeah, good luck with that also. Secret spaceship. H.A. Goodman uses facts and logic to counter the cheap MSM half-truths and propaganda, consistently shining the light on constitutional truth. Thanks, brother. Orange Power 2024. Yes! The secret spaceship. One of the great names in this channel's history. Thank you so much. I hope you're doing well. Thank you so much, secret spaceship. Greatly, greatly, greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for the kind words. Really means a lot to me. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. Thank you. So this is Jonathan Turley. Thank you, Secret Spaceship. This is Jonathan Turley on the initial victory when they refused to expedite everything. Jack Smith just keeps, the special counsel just keeps losing and losing. It's really amusing. I'm rhyming. What's going on here?
Seeing the breakdown, Jonathan, of the vote, it's hard to know maybe what the message is politically from the court about this, or how to sort of time out what impact this is going to have on the election.
I think that's right. I think that part of the dynamic here is that the special counsel was asking to effectively leapfrog over the D.C. Circuit in order to get a judgment as quickly as possible. Jack Smith has made very clear that he wants this case tried before the election. And what a lot of us have said is that it's unlikely that many of the justices have the same sense of urgency, because Trump would be eligible for the presidency even if he were convicted. And regular order demands usually that the court hears from the appellate court. Mm-hmm. Now, the impact of this decision on Smith is going to be anything but good. I mean, the reason he was so insistent on leapfrogging the D.C. Circuit is that he believes that this could end up endangering the March trial date. Now, that date, if you remember, was shoehorned by the court.
They wanted to imprison Trump in March to this month. Do you understand that, ladies and gentlemen? That's why I'm doing these segments, because this is the biggest, most important story of Trump victorious over, like, the entire political establishment, even never-Trumpers like Liz Cheney and Kinzinger and others. They wanted to imprison Trump for a speech. It ain't going to happen. And March was supposed to be the month. So now they're not even going to get a decision until June on whether or not the speech is official conduct, which of course it is. See, they made a very absurd, outlandish leap of logic, which is what Democrats do all the time. And then they wonder why the Supreme Court, which is tasked with defining what is and isn't constitutional, then they wonder why the Supreme Court shuts them down and gives them a monumental rebuke and sides with Trump. Because Democrats made absurd leaps of logic. They said, oh, he tried to interfere in the government. No, he didn't. That wasn't his goal that day. Everyone knows it wasn't. And he had nothing to do with the criminal behavior that interfered for a moment with a congressional proceeding. And it's like, you'd think they learned their lesson from a 9-0 unanimous Supreme Court ruling, but they're too deep into their own fantasies. Now they're going to get a huge political defeat, Democrats, and Trump will get a huge victory with presidential immunity in June. And they're not going to get to imprison him. He won't step even 1 second in prison or jail. Not even, he might get convicted in New York for hush money, but that's the weakest case possible. Everyone, left and right, says it's the weakest case possible, and it'll be overturned, if not by the state Supreme Court, by the U.S. Supreme Court. Hit subscribe if you're new.
Just before Super Tuesday, everything has been frozen since the court looked at this question. So he may indeed lose that March date, And then it's a real problem. You go right over a cliff because this is a very jammed calendar. So it's not clear if he could fit a trial between that date and the election.
Why are you not investing in tax liens? No, seriously.
March 4th is the date that he wanted to get things going. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals has said that it's going to hear oral arguments on the 9th of January on an expedited basis. It sounds like it's going to be before a three-judge panel, not an en banc hearing. Two of the three judges, apparently, that will be involved in this are Biden appointees. So reading the tea leaves there, Jonathan, what does that suggest?
Well, the D.C. Circuit was always a good court for Jack Smith. He cannot do better than the D.C. Circuit to hear this case. It's the problem for Jack Smith is that he knows that whatever the D.C. Circuit decides, there's likely to be an appeal. So he was willing to give up what many people assumed would be a favorable decision in order to maximize a favorable calendar.
So this interview was months back. The D.C. courts already sided with the special counsel and Democrats. The problem, tough it out, thank you. S23, hello. The problem, even though the D.C. courts, the two lower courts sided with Democrats, is that the Supreme Court didn't care. The Supreme Court did not care that the lower courts sided with Democrats. That's a huge defeat. And the Supreme Court now is going to say, okay, what are the official acts? A speech is protected under official acts as president. So you can't, if there's Nixon v. Fitzgerald, which is Supreme Court precedent, you can't imprison Trump because of a speech. See this stupid, absurd leap of logic they're trying to make? And then they wonder why the Supreme Court just completely offers the most monumental rebuke.
Now, what happens now is not going to work as planned for Jack Smith. Once they hear this case in January, they have to write the opinion. They'll do that as quickly as possible. But then Trump's people can do what's called an appeal in bank, which is to ask the court as a whole to look at this question before they appeal to the Supreme Court. That will take time. And then if the in bank accepts the case, then he'll never see a March trial. But then at that point, the Trump people can apply to the Supreme Court. So there's a lot of runway now between him and that March date that he's got to be able to cross. And the odds are he's not going to be able to stick the landing. He's going to lose that March date. Keep in mind, because everything has been frozen in D.C., there's a lot of work that still has to be done for the trial. So as soon as all of this is done, it's got to go back to the court, and they've got to decide what they have time for in terms of that trial. So the odds, if you're going to Vegas right now, are not on Jack Smith for a March trial.
Given all that, Jonathan, do you think this was the appropriate decision from the court, or does it surprise you at all?
It doesn't surprise me. I said this a few days ago that I thought that the correct decision of the court was to turn down this request because in many ways, it was baffling to read Smith's filing. He kept on telling the court, it must be done fast, it must be done fast, but he's really short on explaining why. He just says, well, this is a case of great importance. But for the court,
because they want to interfere in 24. That's why this is an unmitigated disaster for Democrats. They wanted to interfere. They know they can't defeat Trump. They know that 7 years of saying that Trump is a menace and that Trump is the worst president of all time, nobody cares anymore. Nobody cares anymore. People don't trust media. They don't listen to pundits anymore, and people are tired of inflation, of terrible a terrible economy, really, it's not a very good economy when you look at the interest rates and you look at inflation just waiting to bubble up. It's not. And then you have this. I mean, I said when Biden was so victorious, yes, with his eloquent charm and his ability to communicate, and all the wonderful, the people were so excited to hear him speak. I said that Democrats and their foreign policy will be militant, things will break down, we'll have endless quagmires throughout the world, and I was unfortunately right. So you have they know they're going to lose to Trump. What are they doing? They're trying to imprison Trump. That's why when you devote your life, and this is just what happens in life. If you devote your life to trying to hurt someone, okay, you're living a miserable existence. Okay, Democrats, morally superior, highly educated liberal Democrats, have lived a very miserable existence because they've devoted their entire lives to taking down and disparaging and insulting and demeaning Trump and trying to convince people that he's a menace to society and to the Constitution, to the Republic, to the rule of law. Nobody believes it. Nobody believes it. And imagine the gigantic middle finger seen throughout the universe when Trump wins again. November, ladies and gentlemen, will be the most important presidential contest of our lifetime. You've heard that before, but it's true. It'll be the most important president. That's why you have to all choose Donald Trump. For a great economy and a great foreign policy, you'd have to be a complete imbecile to vote for the current president, mashed potato brains. I mean, objectively, just objectively, things were better with Trump. 2017, 2018, 2019, and his last year in office, it was Democrats that shut down the U.S. economy and did so many things that were counterproductive. Forced so many counterproductive measures. It's unbelievable. But then again, you're talking about very apoplectic, hysterical individuals. Let's go ahead and listen to future President Donald Trump.
Hello, everyone. It's your favorite president speaking to you on a really great day of victory. 1 week ago, we had something called Super Tuesday, and it was indeed super because we won at numbers that nobody has ever seen before, records in virtually every state. And tonight, likewise. But this one got us over the top. The Republican National Committee has just declared us the official nominee, and so we're the official nominee of the Republican Party, which is a big deal. But most importantly, we now have to go on to victory because our country's in serious trouble. We have millions and millions of people flowing in. We have no respect on the world stage. What we say doesn't mean a thing anymore. And to have that happen is unthinkable. We have an economy that outside of certain little areas is doing very poorly. And we have something very, very important. We have a United States military that has to be taken care of. Again, this was a great day of victory. Last week was something very special, Super Tuesday. But now we have to get back to work because we have the worst president in the history of our country. His name is Joe Biden, sometimes referred to as Crooked Joe Biden, and he must be defeated. Our nation is failing.
I think George W. Bush and Biden are the two worst presidents. I think George W. Bush above Biden as number one in terms of the worst president. Biden a close second.
We're a nation that is in serious decline. We've never had a situation like this where we're not respected, we're laughed at, we're considered almost a joke. We're going to turn it around. We're going to drill, baby, drill. We're going to close our borders. We're going to...
When Democrats say, oh my God, drill, oh my God, it's like it was Biden who released millions and millions of barrels of strategic petroleum reserves, and then asked other countries and the U.S. oil industry to produce more and give us more. I mean, the hypocrites, and then they say, oh, we're for the environment. Like, you look at what they've done. There was a pipeline that might have, this administration might have had something to do with destroying. So, I mean, an environmental disaster from that, they don't care. It's just what Democrats do when you actually understand politics, you understand that Democrats are the most corrupt political party now. Republicans, the Trump populist Republicans are infinitely less corrupt. They actually believe, they don't want never-ending military conflict. They're actually more in line with the 80s Democrats. Trump Republicans, Trump supporters are more in line with 80s Democrats than they are with the early 2000s Republicans, which is what today's Democrats are aligned with. It's kind of interesting, but you have to know something about politics. Most pundits don't really see that.
Do things like nobody's ever seen before, and we're going to make our nation's economy be the best ever in the world. We had the best economy ever just a short while ago, and we're going to have that again. We're going to have people come into our country, but they're going to come in legally, and we're going to get your energy costs down by numbers that nobody would have said even possible. We have some sections of this country that are paying the highest numbers in the history of our country and among the most expensive energy anywhere in the world. And yet we have more liquid gold, I call it, under our feet than any other nation. Just 3 years ago, we were energy independent, and now we're going around begging for energy. So we're not going to have that anymore. We're going to have a strong country. We're going to have a respected country. We have to win an election, and we should win it by a lot, because there's never been anybody worse at doing that job than Joe Biden. So we're not going to take time to celebrate. We'll celebrate in 8 months when the election is over. November 5th, I believe, will go down as the most important day in the history of our country. So start thinking about it. Start thinking about your vote, because this vote is going to be the most important vote you've ever cast. And again, for this evening and for last week and for all the weeks before, for the tremendous success we've had in this primary, I want to thank everybody. But much more importantly, we have to get to work to beat Joe Biden, the worst administration, the worst president in the history of our country. They are destroying our country.
Jordan, thank you for the super chat. Thank you so very much. So yeah, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, hit subscribe. This is the most important story. I mean, you have to understand there's a huge victory for Trump on the horizon. Georgia case dismantled. Florida case is pretty much dismantled. He's a president with the power to declassify. They might actually convict Trump in New York. They might. But that would lead to Trump would actually gain politically. Paul Bartlett! Thank you so very much, Paul. You are so wonderful. Jordan, thank you. Paul, thank you so much. My God, thank you. But ladies and gentlemen, you're going to get the oral arguments in April and then the actual decision in June. And I'm telling you, they've already, with a 6-3 Supreme Court conservative, Roberts sometimes siding with the liberals, but he won't in this case. Neither will Kavanaugh. This is about the Constitution, the rule of law, Supreme Court precedent, and allowing the executive branch to function. You have to allow the executive branch to function. And nothing Trump did that day was beyond what a president is able to do and what the Constitution protects the president in terms of doing. He performed a speech. He contested results through legal means. And it was other people that committed crimes. And if you listen to Vivek Ramaswamy, very intelligent man, there was a lot of things going on there that had absolutely nothing to do with Trump or Trump supporters. So hit subscribe. Paul, thank you again. Yeah, I do think, John, it's going to be a 6-3. Could even be a 7-2. It could even be, you could even get a liberal Supreme Court justice saying, you know what? Yeah, you're not going to be able to. I don't think, see, the problem with these indictments is that they're affecting future presidents. Democrats are actually influencing future presidencies with their apoplectic behavior. So the Supreme Court is not going to allow the Democratic Party to influence future presidencies. The Constitution is not going to be, there's not going to be a Supreme Court precedent that says it's constitutional to imprison a president. Say that 20 times. Paul Bartlett, thank you again. You can't imprison a president because he performed a speech. You can't imprison a president because he performed a speech. You can imprison a president if he was complicit in a burglary, which is a crime. A speech is not a crime. This is just basic logic. But again, you have to slowly spoon feed basic logic to the morally superior, highly educated Democrats. Hit subscribe to this channel right now. Paul, thank you so very much. Alone, I don't think, it could be 7-2. I think 7-2 or maybe 8-1. Hit subscribe, everyone. Paul, thank you so very much.